The air inside the tomb was heavy with the scent of resin and myrrh. Cleopatra sat on the cold stone floor, her golden jewelry dulled by dust. Across her lap lay Mark Antony, the Roman general who had once commanded legions, now pale, bleeding from a self-inflicted wound. His breath rattled. She whispered something in Greek, a phrase only they understood. Outside, the city of Alexandria groaned under the weight of Octavian's armies. The walls shook. The last stand of Egypt had begun. But Cleopatra was not crying. Her eyes, dark and unblinking, were fixed on the doorway, waiting for the moment. She had already decided no Roman would drag her through the streets in chains. She would die a queen, not live as a prize. How had it come to this? How had the most learned, cunning, and charismatic woman of the ancient world gone from ruling the Nile to hiding in her own mausoleum? This is not just the story of Cleopatra's love affairs or the way she died. It is the story of her calculated rise, her mastery of image, and the deadly political games that brought down an empire. Because long before she stood face to face with Octavian, Cleopatra had been a survivor. She had outmaneuvered her own siblings, seduced the two most powerful men in Rome, and made Egypt rich again while empires crumbled around her. But in the end, she made one final gamble, a bet so bold that if it had succeeded, the map of the ancient world would look nothing like it does today. That bet failed. She had already decided no Roman would drag her through the streets in chains. She would not be remembered as a prize, but as the hand that chose when the game ended. Crisis was Cleopatra's cradle. She was born in 69 BC into a palace that glowed on the outside and bled on the inside. Egypt was rich in grain and temples, but the Ptolemies who ruled it were Macedonian Greeks, a foreign house trying to look native while Rome's shadow stretched across the sea. Her father, Ptolemy XII, Orleats, the flute player, kept his crown by paying for it. Gold moved to Roman pockets. Debts piled up. Pirates gnawed at trade. Each compromise bought one more season on the throne and one more enemy in the streets. Cleopatra watched and listened. Unlike many in her line, she learned to speak Egyptian as well as Greek. Then more languages followed: Latin, Hebrew, Aramaic, others, so she could hear people without a translator bending the truth. Fluent in Egyptian and Greek, she added Latin, Hebrew, and Aramaic until no translator could twist her meaning. Lessons in philosophy ran alongside drills in public speaking, and market visits taught her the grain price as surely as palace tutors taught diplomacy. She was not yet queen, not yet a lover of great men, just a teenager cataloguing the ways power moves. What she stored in her mind would matter more than what glittered on her wrists. Silence taught patience. And she was watching everyone. Education, for her, was practical. She practiced public speaking until a crowd leaned in. She learned the price of grain, the schedule of the Nile, the cost of soldiers, the limits of patience. Tutors taught her how to flatter, how to threaten, when to be silent. She read histories of kings who fell because they believed their own statues. Meanwhile, Egypt trembled. Rome annexed lands, loans came due. Crowds muttered about the Greek court. Every festival was a mask over an empty granary. Cleopatra's childhood ends with a lesson sharper than any teacher's. Survival is a craft. To rule, she would have to look Egyptian to Egypt, Roman to Rome, and inevitable to both. Exile was coming, not as punishment, but as the first test in a game she'd been studying her entire life. Royal blood is no shield when the throne is a battlefield. By her late teens, Cleopatra was co-ruler of Egypt, on paper. Tradition demanded she marry her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, then barely 11. In public, their names were spoken together, stamped together on coins, inked side by side on decrees. But in private, every decision that mattered came from her mind, not his. It didn't take long for the palace whispers to grow teeth. Advisers, old men with more ambition than loyalty, saw in Ptolemy a pliable child king they could control. Cleopatra, however, was no child, and certainly no pawn. Her likeness began to appear alone on official decrees and temple reliefs, an unmistakable sign she saw herself as sole ruler. By 48 BC, the younger brother's patience had dried up. His allies pushed her out of the palace. She fled first to Thebes, then farther east to Syria. Most queens would have accepted exile as the end. Cleopatra treated it as a campaign. She used her time gathering mercenaries, Arabian cavalry, Eastern archers, men loyal to her purse, not her brother. Meanwhile, Rome itself was tearing apart in civil war. Julius Caesar hunted his rival Pompey across the Mediterranean. Egypt, rich and strategically placed, became a prize worth fighting for, and Cleopatra saw an opening. The plan was simple. Let her brother's camp think her powerless while she positioned herself to intercept the most powerful man in the Roman world. But plans have a way of twisting. When Caesar arrived in Alexandria chasing Pompey, he found not an ally in Ptolemy, but a snake pit. Two royal siblings claiming the same throne. Cleopatra was still in exile. Her army waited, restless, along the borders. The city was a chessboard. She needed one move to get herself inside the palace, past the guards loyal to her brother, and directly into Caesar's presence. That move would become one of the most famous entrances in all of history. A move so daring it could have ended not in Caesar's favor, but with her body dumped quietly into the harbor. Sometimes the smallest door is the one that changes history. On a warm Alexandria night, Cleopatra made her move, not with an army, but with a carpet. Julius Caesar had taken up residence in the royal palace, summoned there by the chaos between the feuding siblings. Her brother's guards watched every entrance. A formal audience was impossible, but a rolled-up rug could pass as a gift. According to the historian Plutarch, she had herself wrapped in that carpet, or possibly a linen sack, and her loyal servant Apollodorus carried it through the gates as if delivering a fine tribute. No one stopped him. Hours later, in the flickering lamplight of Caesar's quarters, the bundle was unfurled, and out stepped Cleopatra, young, confident, and already in command of the moment. She didn't waste time. She spoke in Caesar's own language, bypassing interpreters and winning him with her intelligence before her beauty. Her words were not pleas. They were offers. Restore me to the throne, and Egypt will be Rome's most loyal, most profitable ally. Caesar, pragmatic to the core, saw the advantages. Alexandria was the jewel of the Mediterranean trade network. Having its queen in his debt was worth more than siding with a boy king controlled by self-serving advisers. By morning, Cleopatra had an ally far more powerful than any mercenary army. The decision sparked immediate unrest. Ptolemy XIII's supporters rioted, trapping Caesar and Cleopatra inside the palace. For months, the pair endured the siege of Alexandria. Cleopatra moved through the halls like she had always belonged there, her calm presence in sharp contrast to the chaos outside. Food grew scarce, skirmishes flared, and still she waited, knowing time and Roman reinforcements were on her side. When Caesar's forces finally broke the siege, the tide turned swiftly. Ptolemy XIII fled toward the Nile and drowned in the retreat, whether by accident or by design, no one could say. Cleopatra was restored to the throne, now officially co-ruling with her even younger brother, Ptolemy XIV, a boy far easier to manage. For Egypt, it seemed a return to stability. For Cleopatra, it was the opening act of a far larger play. Her place beside Caesar was more than political. It was personal, and when she gave him a son, she knew the stakes had leapt beyond the Nile, all the way to the heart of Rome. But if Caesar was her ticket to unshakable power, his enemies were already sharpening the knives. Power in Egypt was never just about the Nile, it was about Rome. For a time, Cleopatra's alliance with Julius Caesar seemed unshakable. She had regained her throne, secured her position, and given him a son, Caesarion. But in 44 BC, the marble floors of the Roman Senate ran red. Caesar had been assassinated, stabbed by men he had once called friends. News of his death rippled across the Mediterranean like a shockwave. In Alexandria, Cleopatra understood instantly what it meant. Her strongest protector was gone, and Rome was not a single stable entity. It was now 3 men, each clawing for Caesar's legacy: Octavian, adopted heir; Marcus Lepidus, a political broker; and Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal general and the man who commanded the East. Octavian's Rome was far away. Antony's Rome was much closer, and Antony needed resources: Egypt's wealth, Egypt's ships, Egypt's grain. Cleopatra saw the opportunity, but her path was dangerous. Rumors already swirled in Rome that she had bewitched Caesar. Another public alliance with a Roman leader could either cement her power or invite her destruction. Their first meeting in Tarsus became legend. Antony summoned her, expecting a nervous supplicant. Instead, she sailed up the Cydnus River on a barge with purple sails, silver oars keeping time to flutes and drums. She reclined under a gold canopy, dressed as the goddess Isis, while servants scattered incense into the air. Antony, a man accustomed to military order and political games, found himself stunned. Cleopatra had turned a political summons into theatre, and she had made herself the center of it. In private, their negotiations were blunt. Antony needed money for his Parthian campaign. Cleopatra wanted Egypt's old territories back. They left Tarsus bound by a deal, and, soon after, by something far more personal. When Antony returned to Alexandria, he stayed. Publicly, they celebrated feasts. Privately, they plotted. Cleopatra's enemies at court were removed, some quietly executed. Egypt's treasury flowed into Antony's war chest, and in return, territories once stripped by Rome were restored to her. For a moment, the balance seemed perfect. A queen with a Roman army at her back, a general with the wealth of the Nile at his disposal. But alliances in Rome were sandbanks, and the tide was already turning. Antony's marriage, still legally intact, to Octavian's sister would soon transform a fragile peace into the spark for a war that neither Egypt nor Rome could contain. Crowns are heavy, but Cleopatra was about to stack them higher. In 34 BC, Alexandria became the stage for one of the most audacious political performances in ancient history. Mark Antony had just returned from a successful campaign in Armenia, financed by Cleopatra, and instead of holding a Roman triumph in Rome, he staged one in Egypt. To Roman eyes, it was a scandal. To Alexandrians, it was a coronation beyond imagination. The city erupted in celebration. Streets were draped in banners, incense burned thick in the air, and the royal barge glittered on the Nile. In the grand court, Antony and Cleopatra sat side by side on golden thrones, dressed as living gods, he as Dionysus, she as Isis. Before them stood their children, Alexander Helios, Cleopatra Selene II, and young Ptolemy Philadelphus. Then came the announcement that shocked the Mediterranean. Cleopatra was now Queen of Kings. Her son Caesarion, the child she claimed was Julius Caesar's true heir, was proclaimed King of Kings. The other children were crowned rulers of distant lands, territories Rome had once claimed as its own. It was a masterstroke of propaganda, positioning her dynasty as rulers of a global empire that rivaled Rome itself. But in Rome, the optics were disastrous for Antony. His decision to distribute Roman territories to a foreign queen and her children looked like treason wrapped in gold leaf. Octavian seized the opportunity, unleashing a wave of propaganda. Cleopatra was a seductress, a sorceress, a queen who had bewitched a Roman general and was using him to dismantle the Republic. The public ate it up. For Cleopatra, the gamble was worth the risk. She now stood at the peak of her power, controlling more land and wealth than Egypt had seen in generations. Antony was bound to her politically, financially, and personally. Her children's futures were tied to thrones across the Mediterranean, but every rise carves its own fall. Octavian began quietly amassing his forces, framing the coming conflict not as a Roman civil war, but as a righteous crusade to save Rome from an ambitious foreign queen. Cleopatra's throne was secure in Alexandria, but beyond the Nile, a storm was gathering. The next battle wouldn't be fought in a council chamber or in a royal court. It would be decided on the open sea. Empires can fall in an afternoon. For Cleopatra and Antony, that afternoon came on September 2nd, 31 BC. Their combined fleets, Egyptian ships heavy with grain and gold, Roman vessels bristling with soldiers, met Octavian's navy off the coast of Actium in western Greece. On paper, Antony's forces were formidable. In reality, they were cornered, exhausted, and outmaneuvered. Octavian's admiral, Agrippa, played the long game. He cut off Antony's supply lines, forcing disease and hunger into the enemy's decks. The wind was against Cleopatra's fleet, making the massive Egyptian ships sluggish. As the battle erupted, the sea became a chaos of ramming prows, snapping oars, and screaming men. Then came the moment that history still debates. Cleopatra's flagship, with its bright purple sails, broke formation and headed for open water. Some claim it was a prearranged escape plan with Antony. Others say panic drove her. Whatever the truth, Antony abandoned the fight to follow her, leaving his fleet leaderless. The sight was all Octavian's men needed, morale shattered, and the battle was lost. The retreat didn't save them, but some whispered it wasn't a retreat at all. Cleopatra may have left Actium with more than her life. Some claimed she carried the last reserves of Egypt's treasury in her hold, already planning for the war after the war. Even in defeat, Cleopatra played her final moves with precision. With Octavian's troops tightening their grip on Alexandria, she retreated to her mausoleum, built not only as a tomb, but as a fortress. Inside, treasures glittered in the torchlight, gold statuary, jeweled regalia, the wealth of a dynasty gathered for centuries. The message was clear. If she could not rule Egypt, she would take its riches to the grave. She sent word to Octavian, feigning negotiation. Some say she hinted at surrender, others that she dangled the promise of Egypt's treasures. In truth, she was buying time. Her loyal servants prepared what might have been poison, or perhaps the infamous asp. Meanwhile, Octavian made his own calculation. Cleopatra alive was a trophy. Cleopatra dead was a problem. When Roman soldiers stormed the mausoleum, they found her already fading, her two most trusted attendants dying beside her. Whether by serpent's bite or a draught of poison, she had denied Octavian the spectacle he craved. The wealth remained, but the Queen of Kings slipped beyond his reach. In the days that followed, Octavian paraded her image in Rome anyway, sculpted in defeat for his triumph. Egypt was absorbed into the Roman Empire, the Ptolemaic dynasty erased in all but memory. Caesarion, her son with Julius Caesar, was executed, her other children vanished into obscurity. And yet, Cleopatra endured. Not in the marble monuments of Rome, but in the stories that refused to die. She became the eternal queen, cunning, ambitious, defiant to her last breath. Her gamble had failed to save her throne, but it succeeded in crafting a legend that still ignites imaginations over 2,000 years later. If you think you know Cleopatra, think again. History's most famous queen still has secrets to tell. Which one should we uncover next?